Chapter 73. Thomas took a seat between Carrie and Snyder. He was so exhausted that his vision was blurred and the sounds were muffled. He was not feeling well and wanted more than anything to go home. It was time for the nightmare to end. The cold eyes from the men standing in front sent chills up his spine. Thomas's gritty eyes were getting heavy, and he was falling into a dark, quiet world. A sudden pain in his side jolted him awake. "Wake up," Carrie whispered as she elbowed him. "Thanks," he growled back, trying to rub the pain away. "I don't know why we're here." "Shh. You're going to get us into trouble." Carrie sat straight up, completely alert. Thomas shook his head and smiled at her. This is what she lives for, the excitement, the unknown. "You're one sick puppy," he whispered in her ear. She pushed him away and pretended to ignore him. "Agents," one of the men up front said, "I'm sorry to bring you here so late, but we just can't let this lead go cold. We've tracked our suspects to an abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. We believe they're planning to settle in for a few days, so once you're briefed, you'll be able to go to your rooms till morning, or what's left of it. I want to hit the high points for the moment, but for now." That was the last Thomas remembered as he drifted off to sleep, leaning slightly on Carrie's shoulder. He had no idea that Madam President was sitting only 2 rows behind Thomas as he slept. Maddie leaned on Nate throughout their trip home, but was it really home? A room high on the 3rd floor of Heritage Manor, even though AJ and Carolyn felt like the parents she never really had. Maddie longed for her sons and her old life. The prospect of existing in a perpetual dream state was rising to a point that Maddie didn't think she could shrug off anymore. Numbness was overcoming her, and everyday life was fading further and further away. "So, this is what insanity feels like," she whispered. "What, sweetheart?" Nate asked. She sat up and looked around. She fought through the numbness that was overpowering her and screamed. She screamed as loud as she could. She screamed and screamed and screamed. Her throat ached from the strain, but she was not going to stop. "Scream, Maddie, scream," her mind yelled at her. "Scream as loud as you can." Nate looked helplessly up at the aide as he approached. They stared at one another while the echoes of Maddie's sharp, piercing cries for help drowned out the sounds of the plane's engine. Both men knew that Maddie was hurting, that they were simply unable to help. Thomas and Carrie stood in the field staring at the empty building less than 100 miles away. No sign of life. The silence was eerie. "Well, what do you think?" "I can't see anything unusual or usual," Carrie stated, studying the building through binoculars. Thomas walked over to the car and leaned against the passenger door. Something just didn't seem to fit. Nothing seemed to fit anymore. He'd had a rather calm existence since his mother's marriage to Nate when he was young, and then he was suddenly thrown into the role of chasing his own mother for the murder of a senator. Carrie interrupted his thoughts. "Well," she hollered from a few feet in front of him, "nothing, absolutely nothing. This is nuts. If your parents are living in there, I'll eat these binoculars for lunch." She lowered the binoculars and turned to join Thomas. Then a car sped up to the building and screeched to a halt. "Quick! Something's going on over there," Thomas whispered. Carrie spun around and fixed the binoculars back on the building. "A man is getting out of the car. He's opening what looks like a garage door. Now someone else is driving the car in, and the man is closing the door behind it." She sighed. Now nothing. Again. She turned and gave Thomas the "what do we do now" look. "We continue watching," Thomas answered. The plane landed without incident, while Maddie continued to scream. Her voice was breaking and not as loud, but the enthusiasm was never ending. Nate was very worried now. For over 2 hours, she has been screaming non-stop. As the plane taxied off the runway, Nate could see the light of the emergency vehicles in the distance. Maddie continued to scream, one short breath after another. Her face was red and her eyes were bloodshot. Drool seeped from her lips and her slacks were now soggy. Her hands were palms up by her side, lifeless. She was oblivious to everything around her. It felt good to scream, and she could not stop. She knew that if she did, she would die. It was shortly after sunset when the car sped from the building. The large door had been left open, almost as if in invitation. The car was running at high speed, and snow was spewing out from behind the wheels, pulling the dirty snow and rock from the frozen ground. The car hit the main road, swerved a few times, and then tore away in the opposite direction from where Thomas and Carrie stood. They stared in awe for a few seconds and didn't move. They both glanced at each other and without saying a word, lunged for their car. Thomas, shaking hard, started the engine but didn't glance in the mirror as he pulled from the side of the road. A horn blared from behind and Carrie heard the screech of tires trying desperately to grab at the pavement. The last thing the two remembered was the jolt of an immense impact from behind. Director Green paced the floor of the hospital waiting room while Dr. Thurston tapped his fingers on the arm of his chair. Agent Owens played with his cell phone, and Agent Snyder glanced around the room, studying each member of his team and their actions. Not a word was spoken. Green's phone rang, and everyone's attention fixated on him. "Hello," he answered meekly. "Green, this is Davidson. I've assigned Devin Arville and Will Brio to the case. Since your two agents are out of commission for a while, I have no other choice. I'm sorry, but we will still have to follow protocol." "Of course, thank you for the heads up." "How are they doing?" Davidson asked with real caring in his voice. "Not sure right now. I'll keep you informed." Green continued his conversation for a few more minutes, then slowly replaced his phone in its holster. "Well," Thurston asked. "We've had to assign new agents to replace Thomas and Carrie," Green answered, lowering his head. The room remained quiet as each agent fell back into his own thoughts. Nate sat diligently by Maddie's bed. Although heavily sedated, she continued to mumble and thrash her head from side to side. "Charlie, Toby, Charlie, Toby, Charlie." She continued to call out to her two sons. The nurse walked up behind Nate and patted his shoulder. She adjusted Maddie's IV lines and then walked out. Nate continued to watch and listen to his wife's mumblings. He was sure he was losing her forever. He picked up his phone and punched the number of her brother. After several rings, their son Charlie answered. Chapter 74. Maddie was floating on a crystal blue sea where the water was clear, cool, and safe. She could hear the water rushing in and breaking against the rocks. She felt at peace with her life, so calm and quiet. She did not want to wake up. With the freshness of the sea's water all around her, the need to remain inside herself was strong, and she could not resist. Maddie could hear the seagulls calling to her from high above. It was as though they were singing to her, chanting for her to sleep even deeper. A deep sleep where there was no pain, no fear. The cool water tickled her back as it tugged at the sand beneath her before heading back out to the dark depth of the eternal sea. All fear and worry was gone, and only a wonderful calmness remained. Maddie suddenly sensed her son Charlie near. This was confusing and interrupting to her wonderful nothingness. Charlie was stroking her hair, beckoning her to come to him. She could hear voices far off in the distance, but they were familiar voices, comforting voices. She still did not want to wake up. It hurt too much. The sea, the wonderful sea, it felt so good, so wondrous to just float. No worries, no cares. Charlie, her son, was close to her, but if she opened her eyes now, he would be gone. Her son. Son. Music. What was that awful music? Music. Yes, it was music. Rock music? Loud, very loud rock music, and it was disturbing her peaceful slumber. Maddie wasn't happy about the music troubling her wonderful nothingness. She wasn't happy at all. The sea kept calling to her, and the cool water felt so good. The tide was slipping in and out in rhythm with her heart. Mom? Who was calling to her? Charlie? Was that her Charlie? A cold, hard impact hit Maddie deep inside her rib cage. It almost took her breath away, and it hurt. It hurt to breathe. She flailed out her arms, grabbing for anything. It hurt to breathe so much. Every breath felt as though hot flames were engulfing her and scorching the fresh air that was only a reach away. Her hands grabbed at something hot and gritty. What in the world is this stuff? Gritty, wet, hot. Noise, lots of noise. Where was that awful noise coming from? Disturbing her, making her breathe, ruining her wonderful nothingness. Maddie tried to yell, "Stop it!" "Mom?" "Dark, all dark," she mumbled. But it wasn't dark, it was very bright, very bright. "Mom?" Maddie stopped flailing her arms and listened. Music. Yes, that was music. Water. Yes, it was real water. Sun. She could feel the sun warming her skin. She tried to open her eyes, but they were so heavy. They were glued together. "Mom?" That wonderful voice was suddenly louder, and she told herself she had to answer, but the words wouldn't come. "Mom!" Water coming in and going out. Water, cool, cool water. Music, that music. "Mom!" Maddie took a deep breath, and the pain was unbearable. The sounds were becoming clearer, and she was sure that now there was music, and the voices and laughter of children. She knew that those were waves breaking on a shore, and seagulls were really in the sky. "Where am I?" she whispered hoarsely. Mad, come back to us, sweetheart. Come on, you can do it, baby." She took another deep breath, and it didn't hurt quite as much. The waves, the cool, cool waves were pushing her, taunting her to wake up, and this time the words did come out. "Where am I?" she whispered again. "That's it, baby. Come back to us, sweetheart." The sun was warm, and it was such a welcoming feeling. The cool water was still rushing back and forth from under her. She felt light, then heavy again. "Mom!" She reached down, deep down inside herself, and with all the strength that remained with every fiber of her inner being, she took a deep breath and was finally able to speak. Her voice was weak and faint. "Charlie? Mom, wake up, Mom. I'm here, Mom. I'm here." Maddie's eyes were being wiped with something cool. She slowly opened them, but everything was blurry. She blinked several times, and her son's beautiful face was all she could see. "Charlie?" "Thank you, God. Thank you," Nate whispered, kissing Maddie's forehead with tears in his eyes. Chapter 75. Now that I'm in charge, things are going to be quite different around here. I've never lost a suspect, and this one is not going to get away if I can help it. Agent Arville kept his eyes fixed on the road. Agent Willard Brio sat silently in the passenger seat, examining the handheld electronic map as they rushed toward their destination, Bismarck, North Dakota. "What exit do I take?" Arville asked. "Take the business district route of Interstate 94. It runs right into Old Highway 10. Then take a left," Brio answered. With sirens and lights blazing, the patrol car sped toward the warehouse where Madison Jane Matthews Olson Edwards was hiding. Agent Brio repeated his orders over and over again in his head, and he worried that they would conflict with what Arville was expecting from him. It seemed only yesterday that Brio was complaining that his assignments were not utilizing his exceptional abilities, and now he was wondering if he wasn't in way over his head. The doctor's footsteps echoed off the walls as he approached the agents, who were anxiously waiting word about their partners and friends. Thurston saw him first and jumped to his feet. The others followed suit, and all were standing when the doctor spoke. "They're very bruised, a few broken bones and some stitches, but they'll be just fine in a few days." "Thank you, Doctor." Dr. Lewis sighed with relief, reaching out to take the doctor's hand. "Thank you so much. When do you think they'll be able to go home? Let's give them a day or two. They're both in a lot of pain, and only time will heal their wounds. Yes, definitely. Thank you, Doctor. When can we see them? The agent's car sped down Old Highway 10 toward Apple Creek Road. The sun was setting behind the cars, and the road ahead was dark except for the bright halo of lights that engulfed the abandoned warehouse. "Damn those idiots!" Arvil snarled. "I thought you called ahead and set everything up with the locals." "I did, sir," Brio said. "Nothing like announcing our arrival to the back eyes," Arvil snapped, as he slid the car to a stop. "Like they're just going to sit around and wait for us to come pick them up?" The old warehouse was surrounded by patrol cars with flashing red and blue lights. Bright neon lights lit the ground and heavens and caused dark shadows that gave Brio an eerie feeling of doom. He rubbed his arms trying to make the feeling fade, but it didn't work. His inner alarm was ringing full strength, and he couldn't shut it off. His hands were shaking, and his whole body was trembling. Brio had a really bad feeling about all of this. "What's the matter with you?" Arvil asked, more as a second thought than a real concern. Then he headed off to find the officer in charge. "What idiot decided on this party?" Brio heard Arvil snap at an armed officer. "We have them trapped inside, sir," the young man replied. "Great! This is just too freaking great!" Brio rubbed his gun caringly. It was snug at his side. "Easy, girl, easy." Maddie stared into her son's eyes and cried. Her whole body ached, and her strength was gone. She tried to touch Charlie, but there wasn't enough energy to raise her arm. Charlie sensed his mother's wants and took her hand in his. He brought her hand to his face and gently kissed her fingers. "I'm here, Mom. I'm really here. In fact, we're all here." Charlie's face was slowly coming into focus, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "We?" Maddie mumbled. "Yes, Mom, we're all here." "Where's here?" she asked softly. Her throat was aching, and it was so dry she couldn't swallow. Charlie could see his mother struggling and offered her a small sip of fresh water. "We're a long way from home, my love," Nate whispered. Maddie tried to move but couldn't. "What's wrong with me?" she asked. "Drugs, my love. You've had a very bad spell, and the doctors pumped you full of 'em. They'll wear off soon." Nate raised her up slightly so she could see her surroundings. They were on a deserted beach with high, jagged rocks. The water was crystal clear, and the warm air was fresh. She could hear children's voices in the distance. As she glanced around, a wave of nausea hit her. "Get the nurse," Nate directed, to Charlie, who ran to fetch for help. Director John Green stood quietly at the foot of the bed as Marlena held Thomas's hand. Her eyes were swollen and red, and tears rolled slowly down her cheeks. She glanced at Director Green with questions and hate in her eyes. "Why? How?" she cried out. "You know how close he is to his mother. How could you ask him to track her down?" Green stumbled over his words as he spoke. "It was his decision, not mine. I wanted him off the case. He demanded to see it through." Marlena couldn't stand to look at the man any longer, so she dropped her head and kissed her husband's hand. Green felt sorry for Thomas and his wife. He had never felt sorry for anyone before, other than Maddie. Devin Arvil and the officer in charge discussed plans on how to get the two suspects to surrender while Brio stood quietly in the shadows deciding on his next move. Brio had his orders, and nothing would stop him. Dead, not alive. The system was already installed, and all he had to do was hit his target. His only concern was whether he would be far enough away to avoid being injured by the explosion. "What the hell's bothering you?" Devin asked Brio, scratching his stomach. Nothing, sir. Just a lot on my mind." Dr. Lewis stood quietly in his office, overlooking his hometown of Oklahoma City. The last snows of February were gently falling, and they gave the illusion of peace throughout the land. As he sipped his lukewarm coffee, Lewis thought back to when Maddie would bring little Toby into his office. He and that sweet boy would pretend that the tall windows were high cliffs and that they could fall off at any moment. They would cling to the windows and yell for help. I'm falling! Save me, Maddie! Louis would yell, and little Toby would try to pry him from the window. Maddie sat patiently on the couch and shook her head in amazement and gave Louis that warm, wonderful smile. Now he was wondering if he'd ever see her again, or if he'd ever see Toby again. The beep from his phone startled him from his thoughts. "Yes," he yelled from the window. "I'm sorry to bother you, Doctor," came the soft voice of his secretary, "but there's an FBI agent here to see you. A Cynthia Burgess. Shall I show her in?" "Yes, Connie, thank you." Cynthia Burgess was about 30-something, with short, sandy blonde hair. She had a perky attitude and bounced as she walked. If anyone saw her strolling down a street, they'd never know she was an FBI agent. "Hey, Louis, how's life?" she asked in her usually high, squeaky voice. "Just fine, Cynthia. What do you have to report?" "Gee, such professionalism. Okay, then I can play the game, too. We found them, sir. It wasn't hard, sir." She stood with her arms clasped behind her, rocking side to side. Louis was losing his patience. "Okay, I give up. Where are they?" "Oh, sorry." She pounced to take a seat on a sofa. "Comfy," she giggled as she bounced up and down. "Oh, sorry, I get carried away sometimes," she said when she saw the look Louis was giving her. "They're on a private island in the Bahamas, sir. Musha Cay Islands, sir, to be exact. Sir. It's booked for several months. I'm not sure who paid for it. We can't figure that one out. Sir. Whoever it was paid in cash." She stood and walked toward Louis's desk, but turned and added, "Sir, I'll leave the report here on your desk. Like I said, we do not know who paid, nor will we ever know. I made sure of it. Oh, by the way, my only report lies on your desk. There will not be another. Bye for now." She winked as she left his office. Once again, Louis looked toward the heavens and thanked his Maker. His life was finally becoming a little simpler. He hoped. Thomas opened his eyes, slowly, and saw Marlena, asleep with her head resting on the edge of his bed. His body ached and his head was spinning. His hips had fallen asleep and he needed to adjust his position, but as he did, Marlena sat up, rubbing her eyes, and pushed her hair from her face. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Sore. Where am I? Where's Carrie?" "She's in the next room. You're in a hospital. A car accident. You don't remember?" "Not really. Is Carrie okay?" He tried to sit up, but Marlena gently pushed him back down. "She's fine. Bruised, but fine. You can see her tomorrow, or when you're feeling up to it. You need to sleep." Marlena began to cry, and Thomas squeezed her hand. Maddie had slept better than she had in a long time. Her family was here with her, wherever in the world here was. She opened her eyes to a bright morning light, with waves breaking on the shore and the songs of birds. The air was crisp, with a comforting freshness. She didn't recognize any of the wonderful aromas floating in through her window, nor was she sure of the time, but she didn't care. She was resting peacefully, just knowing her family was near. The thought of rising and exploring intrigued her, but she still felt slightly lightheaded and dizzy. She decided to take it slow, but as she raised her head ever so slightly off the pillow, the room began to spin uncontrollably. Her stomach tied into a hard knot, and she felt sick. She dropped her head back to the pillow and took in a deep breath to calm her spinning head. As the room slowed, she heard footsteps coming down the hall. "Mom?" Charlie whispered from the door. "Are you awake?" It was just too wonderful to hear her young son's voice. "Yes. Come in, please." As Charlie sat next to her mother, Maddie touched and rubbed his arm with tenderness. "Is it really you, Charlie? Or am I dreaming again?" "No, you're not dreaming. It's me." "Where are we? Who's here?" she asked, not wanting him to vanish from her sight. "Dad's boss rented this island, and it's far away from everything. It's really cool, Mom. Just wait. Uncle Doug and Aunt Donna brought Skylar and Tyler." He paused slightly. "And Jesse and Kelly are here, too. So when you're feeling better, you can spend time with all of us. Oh, and of course, Dad's here, too." "Toby, is Toby here?" she asked hopefully. "No, Mom. Toby and Marlena are at home. You know that." Charlie didn't want to tell Maddie about the car accident. they hadn't heard any updates, so they weren't sure of Toby's condition, and they didn't want to upset her. But Maddie knew things were not right, and she wondered if they ever would be. She cried as Charlie bent over and hugged her. She wanted her Toby with her, and she wanted the rest of the world to go away and leave them alone.